over the COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program. There's quite a bit information to share. And I also, so what we're going to go through here, first of all, just a quick review of the program overview, the role of the agencies, why we're asking you to be here today, why DHSP is asking you, why the Housing Department is asking you, and why this is critical, particularly for HIV providers. The eligibility for the program, required documents needed from whether you're serving a tenant or a landlord. The housing, just a quick overview of the Housing is Key portal, because that is where all applications will be submitted. And I will reiterate this throughout the morning, is a client needs to have an email address in order to do this. So this may be something that you will need to provide assistance with the client. Also, existing resources that are out there to provide additional assistance to perhaps you and the client that you're serving, and then we will go into questions. So really quickly, why are we asking, or why is DHSP and the LA Housing Department asking you to be here? So per the letter set out by DHSP and the LA Housing Department, our HOPA program, the following staff are highly encouraged to assist clients with ERAP. Housing specialists, this should not be anything new to you. MCC teams, I know with your role in EFA recently, this will not be new to you. Benefits specialists, also your role in EFA, not anything new to you. ADAP enrollers and HERR staff. So you'll notice items 1 through 4 are traditional providers that provide assistance to persons living with HIV. So these housing applications may not be anything new. However, for HIV prevention staff, this may be a whole new paradigm for you, something that's very different as far as the type of information that you're being asked to collect and so forth. And you also may say, well, how is this really part of my job as an HIV prevention staff? Well, as Mario indicated, housing is prevention. And there are multiple studies that indicate that a person who is housed is more likely to engage in more health promoting behaviors. If they're positive, they're more likely to be adherent to their medications. You also note that housing is an integral part of the Ending the Epidemic initiative, as well as the National AIDS Strategy. It's also maybe a good way to engage your clients in methods that previously they not have engaged in, because often a client is not willing to talk to us about much unless they have a roof over their head. So if we can maintain their housing, it's more likely that they may trust all of us to provide additional types of services. We also, recognize that there's really a critical role for the HERR providers to reach HIV negative clients, given that the first 4 positions on here traditionally work with positive clients where these services are available. And this is one time where we can really engage and provide assistance to HIV negative clients who maybe that have back due rent. So this is really critical. And I know for those agencies that have HIV prevention, most likely you have one of these other types of positions that could also provide assistance to you. Another area that you will need to consider within your agency is infrastructure to help clients have access to computers. Some of your clients that come in for assistance, whether they're a tenant or a landlord, may not have an at-home computer or a laptop. Obviously, they can go to a library or things of that nature, but they may need more hands-on assistance. So the more that you can provide that assistance within your agencies, to have a dedicated computer where they can log in if they need to create an email address and so forth with your assistance would be highly recommended. So program highlights. There are quite a bit of information in here, so I'm going to click through all of this so that you're not having to read a whole bunch of information at once, but just remember that this is being recorded if you need to go back and review it again. All of this information can also be found on the Housing is Key website, and that portal, that URL address will be coming up soon. And if any of those people who are unmuted, if I am going too fast, please let me know. So the first thing, so what is this? This is free financial assistance through this portal, through the state. It's available to landlords and renters who need assistance or help with unpaid or future rent or utilities. So I say future rent because a tenant can apply for up to 3 months of future rental assistance. Landlords and renters are both encouraged to apply. Income eligible applicants may qualify regardless of immigration status and will not be required to show proof of citizenship. That is obviously a critical piece of information so that people do not feel reticent about applying for this program. Assistance from the California COVID Rent Relief Program does not count as earned income for renters, which is also important. So it doesn't affect any of their eligibility. In particular, benefits assistance programs such as CalFresh or CalWorks. All applicant information is kept private and will not be shared. Applications will be accepted on an ongoing basis. Priority assistance will be given to income eligible households most at risk of eviction. Now, where it says will be accepted on an ongoing basis, it's going to be really critical that people get completed applications into the portal no later than September 30th. So the quicker you can get these applications in prior to September 30th, the better. Once an application has been successfully processed, both the landlord and renter will be notified of next steps. That's why it is critical for these individuals, both tenants and landlords, to have an email address. So that is a really quick overview of the program. Once again, I will have the URL for the Housing is Key website in just a moment, where if you want to flip through, it'll have all of this information because this information is taken directly from their website. So what's covered? So unpaid rent. So if you're, let's say you're working with a landlord who wants to participate in this rent relief program, they can get reimbursed for an eligible renter's unpaid rent dating back to April 1st, 2020. So almost basically a year and a half of back rent that a landlord can collect. Eligible renters whose landlords choose not to participate in the program may apply on their own and receive rental assistance for unpaid rent dating back to April 1st, 2020. Now, similar to STRMU and EFA programs, the check goes to the landlord, not to the client. Upcoming rent. So eligible renters whose landlords choose not to participate in the program, once again, may apply on their own and receive rental assistance dating back to April 1st. Tenants may also apply for future rent for 3 months. So beyond, let's say they have not paid through September, they technically could get rent if they're applying now through December the 31st. Utility assistance, which is another opportunity to receive financial assistance. Eligible renters may also receive assistance for unpaid utility payments, also dating back to April 1st, or for future utility payments, which will both be compensated at 100% of cost, limited to a total of 12 months and paid directly to the utility provider. So what are the requirements? So if you have a client who is a renter, if the client has been impacted by COVID-19, is income eligible, the state in the portal actually calculates this, and we'll show you that in a few minutes. And if they have unpaid rent or utilities or need help with future rent or utilities, they can apply for the COVID rent relief program. Now, I'm certain one of your questions is, well, how did they prove that COVID-19 has impacted their ability to pay their rent? This is, I would have to say, an unanswered question. And I would go ahead and have the client apply anyways. If you have renters, if you have landlords working with a landlord, if you have renters who are behind on the rent and need financial assistance to support this income loss, landlords may also apply for this rent relief program. There is a lot more information that a landlord needs to provide compared to a renter. One, they need to show that the renter's household income is income eligible. All payments they receive must be used to satisfy the renter's unpaid rent. Your renters must take steps to verify that they meet eligibility requirements and sign the landlord's application. They will be notified once, so landlords will be notified once their application is submitted and asked to submit the required information. Just to let you know, though, for landlords, that the income that they receive, or I should say the payments that they receive, it does count as income. It does not count as income for renters, but it does for landlords. So income eligibility. What do the federal guidelines state that eligible incomes must have? So number one, income is at or below 80% of the average median income. So and you will see this again in a few minutes, when you go into the portal, if you put in a person whose household who is one person, their AMI, their average median income, needs to be about $66,000 annual income or less. This is, once again, when we get down to number 4 here, is another, I would say, confusing attribute of the program, particularly for residents of the city of Los Angeles, because when this program was first released back in the spring of 2021, they were prioritizing people at first at 30% and then up to 50%. That language is still hovering out there. So we have just been encouraging and are encouraging any client who's at 80% of AMI to apply, because apparently there should be sufficient money to cover all these individuals and families. Number 2, if a person experienced a decrease in income because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's say maybe a person has been an Uber or Lyft driver and they've had a reduced number of rides that they're doing. Maybe they worked at a restaurant and they were laid off, or a hotel, or they had their own business, and all of that falled off. That which should show probably on any kind of income statements, which we will go through also in a few. Number 3, if they demonstrated any risk or experiencing homelessness or housing instability. And number 4, as I indicated before, when the city of LA launched the program in April 2021, they prioritized people at 30 and 50% AMI. However, all tenants at 80% and below are highly encouraged to apply. Please don't let that be a detriment or have people reticent about not applying because they think that they're not going to qualify because they're above that 50%. And once again, once a client or yourself goes into the portal and you type in how many people live in the household, it does calculate the AMI for that person. They don't have to calculate that on their own. So what are the next steps if you have a client that comes in, whether they're a tenant or a landlord, and they need some assistance? Well, first of all, apply for that rental assistance through the Housing is Key portal. Submit a declaration to the landlord for every month a tenant cannot pay rent. And I will show you what that declaration looks like in just a moment. Know when the rent is due. And this is particularly important for October, when the rent stabilization, or I should say the rent program ends, which will require people to start paying rent in October. So that is important for them to understand when the next rent would be due in October. Once again, the client or tenant must have an email address. If not, please assist the client with obtaining one. So this is an example over there on the right-hand side of it's an online form of a declaration that would be provided to the landlord, letting them know why they're unable to pay their rent. And here is for this particular form, I have the URL over here. So if you don't want to wait until this gets posted, you can always take a picture of this slide right now, so that you have the excuse me, that you have the URL, or you can just Google declaration form, and that should hopefully show up. But once again, this is a fillable form that is online, and then they can just print that out and provide that to their landlord. This declaration form is really critical in the process, particularly after September 30th. So I'm going to go ahead and in a moment turn this over to Darian from the Alliance for Housing and Healing, because if you have a client, particularly an HIV positive client, who qualifies for the Emergency Financial Assistance Program through DHSP or an STRMU grant through HAPA, which program is the best fit? Because you may have someone in the streamline right now, ERAP. So this emergency program we're talking about right now is the best fit. We want to use these funds first. Remember that anything that comes through Ryan White, which is EFA, or HOPA funds, those are the funds of last resort. We want to expend these federal funds coming to the state through ERAP first. So what happens then if you have a client in that system? Well, if a client already has an EFA or STRMU application in the queue, what should they do? And Darian, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. I'm Darian Acevedo, Senior Director of Housing Support Services at Alliance, and I oversee both the DHSP EFA program and the HOPWA rental assistance programs. And as Jeff has stated, and Marian Chui also stressed in the beginning, we want to emphasize that we want to prioritize this assistance before all of our other types of assistance. And what we're asking all of you is, if you have a client that's already submitted an application for EFA or STRMU, please let us know. Communicate with our EFA coordinator or a HOPWA monitors so that we know your client is applying for the state assistance. But continue the process with us. As soon as we have a complete application that can be processed, we will go as far as approving that application. We will not fund it, but we will maintain it so that if for whatever reason your client is rejected for the state rental assistance, we're hoping we can move forward with EFA or STRMU as quickly as possible. If we have what we need, maybe just need to update income and we can fund as quickly as possible, we will do our very best to move forward with funding that client and providing assistance immediately. So what we're asking today is that you make sure that you communicate with us and let us know so that we will process your application. We will approve it if we have what we need, but we will maintain it on standby and let us know if that client is going to need assistance so that we can let you know then at that point what we will need so that we can move forward as quickly as possible. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. Thank you. So next slide. What is the required paperwork? So now that you have a client who is interested and they're behind rent or a landlord, I'm sure most of us will be working with tenants. I'm just going to assume that. So first of all, is their 2020 tax return? Or what we'll notice at the top, it says one of the following. It does not say all of the following. It says one. Or they're a 2020 W-2 and a 1099 if they were unemployed. Any current pay stubs that they have. Proof of participation in the state or federal subsidy programs such as CalFresh or CalWorks. Your 2020 or 2021 acceptance or renewal letter is preferred. So once again, any one of those 4 bullets, not all of them. Finally, what if a client doesn't have any of those? Well, we're going to come to that slide next, sorry. Utility bills. And if a client is applying for help with utility bills, any utility invoices or statements that they have received demonstrating that they have a utility bill that has not been paid, such as water, trash, internet bills, after April 1st, 2020, they qualify. Notice in their internet bills as well, that's considered a utility. Perhaps probably not their television or cable bill, but an internet bill qualifies. So what to do if the client or tenant does not have all the paperwork that we just talked about? Apply anyways. Similar to we talked about the average median income, apply anyways. Most of the information can be certified in the application. The client tenant will just need to provide proof of identification. Once again, if identification could be a statement that where they're living. Once again, like a utility bill that shows that they live at a particular address, that could be a form of identification. So what happens after September 30th? I'm going to go ahead and read through this, but then I'm going to turn this over to Doug at the Intercity Law. Doug, I've unmuted you to go over any other nuances about what could happen with regards to eviction. So this is what we have gleaned from the ruling. As of October 1st, 2021, if a client has not paid rent, so if they've not paid the rent for October, I'm not talking about prior to September, I'm talking about starting October 1, if they have not paid rent and they have not submitted a declaration, the form that I just showed you a few slides ago, and they have not paid 25% of the rent. So if those things happen as of October 1st, tenants in LA County and the city could potentially receive a 15-day notice. Then starting, that's the next sentence should be actually starting October 2nd and not 1st. So starting October 2nd, if a tenant has not paid their October rent, they could receive a 3-day notice if they have not paid rent. So therefore, it's imperative that a client or tenant have a completed application in the portal by September 30th, because if a client was to receive an eviction notice from their landlord, and if it goes to court, and if the judge knows that their application is in process, they will not, as far as we know, will not allow the eviction order to go through. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug if you have anything to add to that discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. We're happy to have the introduction. I'll say a few brief words of introduction to myself, and then Jeff, while I'm doing this, maybe you could also unmute Sarah Kayer, who's our eviction, one of our eviction defense specialists, whom we've also asked to be present to fill in anything that I leave out, and then maybe to take any questions that might occur about some of the technicalities. I really don't have, in a general sense, much to add to what's on that slide for right now. Of course, we are a little worried about it. Where everyone has heard about the quote-unquote eviction tsunami. Inner City and several of our other, fellow legal services organizations have been gearing up to be prepared for this, not only in terms of the eviction onslaught, but also due to the fact that there's going to be the opening of a window to collect unpaid, what we call COVID rent in the small claims courts, going back some period of time. According to the statute, the small claims limit of $10,000 has been lifted for that purpose. So we're beginning to get ready for that potentiality. We recognize, of course, that a lawyer cannot go into small claims court with a client, but the Small Claims Act does allow attorneys to counsel with clients and to help prepare them for money suits in the small claims court. So, Jeff, that's really pretty much all I would have to say. I think people are generally aware that under the Hopler grant, Inner City is prepared to provide holistic landlord-tenant related services to folks across the board, including eviction defense. And so if you could get Sarah unmuted, I'll ask her to say a few words about any of the technicalities beyond what's on that slide.
Excellent. Good morning, Sarah. I have unmuted you.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. Yes, if there are, I know that Doug mentioned the technicalities and the concerns about this sort of onslaught of evictions. One thing that I would really like to flag that's important to, that'll be important to a lot of tenants is that there is a recovery period in the current statute that stretches from between October 1st, 2021 through March 31st of next year. And during this period, the landlords are going to be required to make a showing to the court that they either applied for rental assistance and the tenant did not cooperate, or the state denied the application prior to carrying out, before a court will start the eviction process. So the many of our protections are up on October 1st of this year. They're not all completely gone, and there is this added requirement that tenants or that landlords must have at least applied for these programs and either been denied or the tenant did not cooperate before an eviction can occur.
So thank you for that. That's really helpful. So just to reiterate, so starting October 1st through, you said March 31st, there's a recovery period?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a 6-month recovery period under the statute as it's currently written.
Okay, where the onus is upon the landlord to demonstrate that they've done their due diligence to apply for rental assistance, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, then I will go ahead and go on to the next slide. Just a few things that I think I've omitted so far that were not in the slides, but in my notes. It takes, according to the portal, to the Housing is Key portal, it takes about 30 days for an application to be processed and a check issued. So if we go back to Darian's discussion about EFA and STRMU, there might be, some communication that needs to go back and forth with the Alliance for those clients who are applying maybe towards the very end of this month, given that it will take about approximately 30 days, probably more like 6 weeks for a check to be issued. Also, for income qualifications, if a person is in subsidized housing and getting a subsidy, there's nothing that we have found in the language that would deny them for getting rental assistance. So if they're in Section 8 or getting any other type of rental assistance, that doesn't mean that they would be declined in that, as far as we have seen in the language. So this is the Housing is Key portal. You'll notice that the URL is up here at the top. And if you just do a quick Google search, Housing is Key, this will come up. Now they've changed the website a little bit. So if you hit this, when you go into the homepage, there's a whole bunch of images and stuff. Before, this is what would come up. If you just go to click this apply now, then it comes up with this particular page, which I think is a lot easier than their landing page at the present time. It's just an overload of information. So right here, for people who need to apply for the first time, they're just going to click the apply now button. Or if they already have an application in the queue, let's say that they applied back in March of April of 2021, or maybe they, were really quick to respond and already got their application in within the last week. They just go click here to continue and enter their username and password to see what the status is of their application. So after they click apply now, if they're a new user, this is what comes next. They're going to enter the address of where they're located. If they're located in the city of Long Beach, they are going to be directed, excuse me, to the city of Long Beach's rental assistance, excuse me, program, because they have a separate program for residents of the city of Long Beach. So I just entered the business address here at APLA Health on Kingsley. And it tells me here my jurisdiction is the city of Los Angeles. And from there, to get into the application, then you or the person would click view. So after there's going to be a few questions in there, whether or not a person belongs to a particular Native American tribe. There was also just verifying that, the person is who they are that are applying. And then the next one goes to entering the county of where your property is located and number of household members. And then you push submit. And this is where I told you that the system calculates. It says, is your annual income under this amount? So if it is, then they would click yes and they would continue. So this is almost like there's about 3 screens that are pre-screening a client before they get to this point and they actually start applying for the rental assistance through the state. Next, these are a number of resources that also may be of assistance to all of you. One is the Housing is Key website, which is what I just went over. That also, even before you go into it, has a lot of information about the program. It also talks about perhaps how long, there's a FAQ section in there about how long it takes to have something processed. There's also an information line. So if you're not finding what you need on the website, you can call the Relief Center at this 833 number. You'll note that they're a bit overwhelmed with calls at the moment, and they you can leave a message and they will call you back. Just to let you know, I called yesterday because I did have a question about the AMI. I wanted to get more information before today. I have not received a call back yet. So I'm imagining that they are pretty overwhelmed with telephone calls and questions. There's also, the LA Housing Department has a webinar scheduled for later today. Our hope was that we could do this webinar after in case there's information, but we wanted to get this information out as soon as possible so that you can do what you need to do to get prepared for this particular program. The first one is actually today at 3 p.m. It may be full at this point because I went into that portal yesterday. The other webinar in English showing up is now Wednesday, September the 22nd. And then if you have a client or you yourself would prefer to attend the webinar in Spanish, you'll notice that the dates are over there. So if you go to this portal right here where my cursor is pointing to, that is where you would register for one of these webinars. And given that it's the housing department, they may have, you know, more direct information that perhaps we're providing here today. I will be listening in on that portal, I should say on that webinar, just in case if there's something that we need more clarification with, we can send out that information to all of you. That is why we ask that you put your name and your email address over in the chat room so that we have everybody's information so that we can send out any type of updates that may be available. There's also some particular clinics that have rental assistance or application clinics. And this right here, this particular organization, which is a housing advocacy organization, is actually having a clinic on the 13th of September, which would be a week from, well, a week ago Monday. And so this is their website and they have information about their application clinic that they are hosting. I know that there are a number of organizations that are doing this as well. There was a webinar late last week and they had a number of people in that indicated that they are hosting an application clinic. So if any of those agencies are online today, if you know you're having an application clinic, feel free to put that in the chat so that people are aware of that information. I think that that may, you know, be useful. Not that I'm volunteering, but I will, you know, let you know. Both the Alliance, Daring, and myself and our team are also available. If you have any questions, you could also send that our way. So right now I'm going to turn it over to see if we, I have some staff here that have been fielding questions. We're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go ahead and Tiana or Ruben, if you want to read those questions off, we can go ahead and start and launching that.
Thank you, Jeff. Some questions have been answered for individuals already, so you can always go back to the questions and answers to review some of the answers that have been asked. But one question is, what if they are subsidized through Section 8, HACLA, or Brilliant Corners? Can they apply for assistance with rent and utilities, or will this affect their subsidy? Will they need to inform their advisor?
This is not considered income. And so therefore, the guidelines that we have read thus far, they should continue to, they should apply. That should not affect their subsidy because this is not considered income.
The only thing I would add to that is that you wouldn't be able to apply funds towards the subsidy that's given.
That's correct. Just the rental portion, correct, Chewy?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Okay.
So just to reiterate, if a client is on Section 8, they would only be able to apply for the rent that they owe, not to pay, not to support or to cover the subsidy that they're receiving.
So another question, Jeff, is if we apply client for October and November 2021 rent as well and have not heard back, should we advise client to not pay rent in October and November, or would that risk eviction?
Well, the first thing they need to do is make sure if they're not paying for that in October, November, they need to make sure that they have that declaration submitted to their landlord. If they're a person living with HIV, they may seek out the assistance through a housing specialist to see if they're going to need an EFA grant or an STRMU grant to cover that 25%. Is that correct, Darian?
Yes, and I don't know if maybe Inner City Law can put their 2 cents here too, if we're kind of advising on the right track. For sure, you know, EFA or STRMU could assist, but I would be interested in hearing their input in terms of, is it advisable that they don't pay the rent, or that they seek other assistance, or that they wait for a response from the state?
I'll pass the baton to Sarah on that one.
Sure. So generally, if a tenant can afford to pay the rent, we do recommend that they pay the rent. Or if they can afford to pay 25% of the rent, to pay the rent and submit the declaration. I can't comment on the accessibility of these other grants, but I think it is very risky to tell a tenant not to pay the rent when they're waiting on this rent relief from the state. If it's not been approved yet, if it is forthcoming, that relying on an unapproved application should be the last resort.
Sounds like at that point, the scenario is that then they utilize EFA or STRMU to provide assistance if they still need that.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And providing the 25% of the rent as long as they're able to submit the declaration as well.
So another question, Jeff, let me see. During the recovery period, October 1st through March 31st, if a client's ERAP application is denied, is the landlord required to show the court that they also attempted to secure rental assistance before an eviction can proceed?
I will let Sarah answer that question since she presented that information.
Yes. So for the that is something that the landlord would be required to show. They would be required to show that the application had been submitted and denied, because the landlord would receive confirmation of the denial. But yes, that would be sufficient for the landlord in order to proceed with the eviction.
Got it.
Thank you. I have actually a question over in the chat I'm going to read. This could be for Chewy or Sarah or Doug. I have a client who's not been able to pay rent starting since October 2020. The client has Section 8. He received a pay or quit and a letter from Section 8. The client stated that management will not accept any payment towards rent unless he pays what is owed in full. So he has not paid the 25% required rent. We applied for assistance last Wednesday. That, I guess, is what there's not like I don't know what the question is. Carrie, if you want to, I can unmute you. If you want to let it, so I guess if you want to ask us what the specific question is, are you saying whether or not he can be evicted or not? So Carrie, I just unmuted you if you want to ask that question.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're perfect.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, so I realized that there was a Q&A section.
That's okay.
And so I stopped writing my question. I'm sorry about that. But so since his landlord won't allow him to pay anything unless it's the amount in full since October, will that keep him from being approved for rental assistance? Or what can we do to help him? I don't know, in that situation. I just wanted to get some clarification, because that's been his landlord hasn't been very helpful for him.
Carrie, if you can you send me email some of the details there? Does that person live in the city of LA?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, if you could forward me some of that information, I think the best course of action there is to submit a request with our rent stabilization division. We have a complaint line there, and I think for that instance, especially if the client is attempting to apply for ERAP, and the landlord is not opting in,
Right.
then that would help with some protections.
I'm sorry, and I'm sure the email is on here. I'm on my phone, so I can't see everything. What is can I find that email somewhere?
Sure, it's chuy.orozco@lacity.org, and that's CHUY.OROZCO@lacity.org.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Problem.
There is another question that I think might be important. If the landlord is renting a room out in the home and does not have a formal rental agreement, can that person apply? Also, if the landlord is in a private home and the tenant got behind and the landlord does not have all of the W-9 forms, can the landlord still apply?
So as I understand it, the tenant is renting out a room and there's no lease agreement.
That is correct.
So based off of the City of LA's program, they are able to apply. The only, and we were going through, the reason why we allowed that is because the state allowed us to do that. So I assume that's going to be the same rules with the state program. The only issue we had was with persons of family members that were living under the same household, where a family member was considered a landlord and they were subleasing it to their other family members. Those were the instances where we didn't allow those kind of applications to go forward.
But if that is not the case, then they are allowed to submit an application, correct?
I would encourage them to submit an application, and then what will probably happen is that one of the navigators or someone will touch base with them to make sure that they submit some of those documents.
Ruben, any other questions?
Yes, Jeff. I had a few. I've been getting a few questions regarding how long does it take before they update you on the application status. I see a few of those.
So not just the actual processing of the application, but how will they know how long it takes to know what the current status of it is?
Yes, application status.
Okay, that will be probably a question we'll need to ask in today's webinar. So
it's my understanding that the system that's in place, it'll automatically generate an email stating that the person submitted an application. But yeah, that's something we should ask the webinar today.
Great, thank you.
Here's another one. Would we resume to STRMU for rental assistance after October 1st if 25% of the rent has not been paid or a declaration has not been completed?
Darian, I think that's a good question for you.
Yeah, Tina, would you mind repeating the question?
Yes. Would we resume to STRMU for rental assistance after October 1st if 25% of the rent has not been paid or a declaration has not been completed?
I think the best answer to that question is, I'm assuming at that point, maybe the client did not try to apply for the state or was not selected. I think that at this point, regardless, they should be right now, that scenario applied for the state. And then if they were not able to provide what was needed, if they were denied, because it sounds like they're being pretty flexible with, the requirements, then at that point, sure. Then at that point, let's submit an application for STRMU.
Okay, another question. Once the application is approved from the tenant side, what if outreach to the landlord is unable to be completed? What would happen to the approved application, excuse me? Would the case manager move forward with the application, or what happens to the application if the landlord does not comply?
Well, I would assume in this, well, from the tenant's perspective, the only thing that they need to make sure that they've done is complete the declaration and submit the required documents. That's in the event that a landlord has not tried to apply for themselves. So it's either incumbent upon the tenant to apply, but if the landlord's not going to apply, then they will potentially fund the tenant or the client for their back rent. And the courts will, if the application is completed and it's in the portal, that's all that the client would need to show to the courts if there was going to be an eviction notice.
Okay, and our last question is an EFA application in process enough to deter eviction, or only ERAP applications?
That's actually an excellent question, and I'm wondering if Inner City Law can help us answer. I mean, there's nothing from our program perspective that has any kind of eviction protections, but I'm wondering if a client is they didn't qualify for the state and they're trying to get other type of assistance, would that help keep some protections in place?
I think it would, although I'll let Sarah comment in more detail here in a second. I believe the statute talks about public benefits generally. So I think that would probably work, but let's see what Sarah has to offer on that.
Yeah, yes, I agree with Doug. I think it would work. I'm not sure if the statute addresses that directly, but I do believe that the statute isn't limited to the state rental assistance program. It gives the opportunity for other rental assistance for other public benefits. So I think it would.